Hey there, Bethel Nation!
Hey.
It's Chad.
Cam,
Look at us.
Cham,
We're here.
we're here.
It's another Monday.
That's another Monday.
I know.
Wow,
Through the magic of television, I'm here. Even
What's that
though
song? Manic Monday?
it's just another manic Monday. Do you know that was written by Prince?
No.
Yes.
Manic Monday?
Written by Prince. Performed by what was that? That wasn't the Bangles. That was the other. What was the name of that band?
I don't know.
Oh man, this is how my mind works now. I
That's
can't
going
remember
back
stuff
a long ways.
half the time.
Prince.
Oh
Wow.
goodness gracious! Yeah, written by Prince.
I learned something new.
Was it the Go-Go's? I
what
can't know. What
Go-Go's?
is the name of that group?
I don't know.
I don't know. Oh well. It's Monday.
It's Monday.
We're here.
We're here.
We're here with the devotions.
Yes, we are.
And we're working our way through the Sermon on the Mount. We have some pretty deep stuff we've waded through this last week.
We have, yes.
I don't know that it's going to get too much shallower
Nope.
as we move through the sermon.
We're in
One of the
deep water.
things Cam loves to remind us of, and I do appreciate that, is that this is a sermon.
Yes, it is.
It should be seen and understood as a sermon. And to me, there's a very clear theme that comes out of this sermon
Yeah,
on
it's
the Mount.
emerging.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty clear. Last week we definitely kept hitting the same theme, and I think you'll see that we'll kind of be moving on that same theme this week. But we're gonna break it down a little bit so you guys can hear it. Now you're gonna talk a little bit about an eye for an eye, right?
That's right. That's right. And you know, one thing that I want to also say about this is that it looks like, in some ways, what we're talking about here could be categorized as ethics, how
Yeah.
to live, how
Yeah.
to behave, how to act. But I also want us to understand that it's also theology in the sense that what Jesus is commanding us to do and to be is a reflection of God's nature. I mean, one of the questions we can ask ourselves is, well, why is Jesus commanding these things? Well, because this is what God is like. This is how God treats us, and that's how we're called to treat each other. So it's very behavior and action oriented, but it's also really about what we claim God to be like and to be about. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well. So let's jump into, we're still in chapter 5, and we're going to pick up with verse 38. Jesus, of course, is still speaking and preaching, really. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to anyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. So, Chad, there's a lot of different things we can say about this. One is just the commandment, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is part of the law of Moses.
Yep.
Moses is the one who gave the Israelites this law, and of course, it's a justice law in the sense that it was meant to limit vengeance. It was to put a limit, a cap on vengeance. So, in other words, apparently what was going on back in that day and time was if somebody, I guess, punched out another person's eye, that person would go and kill the person or kill the family. They would go way overboard in the vengeance, the retaliation. And so Moses comes out with this thing that basically says, you know, you cannot do back to anyone any worse than what they did to you. But it was kind of a concession, really, on justice and violence. And it doesn't necessarily reflect God's will for how God wants us to live. It was a concession. It was a way of limiting violence and evil. But Jesus, of course, goes way beyond just the limits of laws. Again, laws are necessary, and they can limit evil, but they don't really get at the heart of the matter, and that's what Christ is concerned about, our hearts, not just laws. And so here, he goes beyond that. So he says, but I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. There could be several possibilities to understanding these verses. One thing to remember is that Palestine and Israel and Jerusalem in this day and time was occupied territory. They were ruled by the Romans. They were ruled by a foreign power. And the Romans constantly took advantage of the peoples that they had conquered. And so for instance, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go the second mile.
Yeah.
Well, one possible scenario here is that, maybe a Roman soldier needed somebody to carry something.
Carry his pack,
They would just grab any old Israelite who was not a Roman citizen. They weren't Roman citizens, so they didn't have any rights. So Jesus and the Israelites, they didn't have rights under Roman law, so they could be abused and tossed around. And so, a Roman soldier could conscript anybody and say, hey, carry my pack. And Jesus is saying, rather than resist that, take it to almost a ridiculous extreme.
Yeah, double it.
And double it. And show people something different that they've never seen before. We don't know the effect that something like that could happen. So, same thing with turning the other cheek. One possible scenario of this is someone who's been dragged to court. And one of the ways that a judge or the prosecutor may insult the person on defense is to literally smack them across the cheek. And it was considered an insult. And Jesus is saying, give them the other cheek. Do something ridiculous. And I think we really see this when it comes to the business about the cloak and the coat. So if someone wants to sue you, so this is a law court scenario, right? If they're suing, this is a law court. So this isn't just about, squabbling between neighbors and things like that. This is like you've been taken to court. Someone wants to sue you for your coat, which is kind of ridiculous. Why would anybody do that anyway? But let's say somebody sues you for your coat. Well, Jesus says, give your cloak as well. And if somebody were to give you their coat and their cloak, guess what they would be?
Naked.
They'd be naked. So you can see there's some hyperbole to this, some extravagance to this. Jesus is pushing it almost to an absurd extreme, but he's doing it to show that this is how God treats us. God does not give us what we deserve. God gives us an abundance of grace and mercy and forgiveness and goes way beyond what we deserve. And so this is what Christ is actually saying. Look, when people mistreat you, show them grace, show them mercy, show them forgiveness, show them generosity, because this is how God treats us. And it could have a positive effect on other people. We know that when Jesus was hanging on the cross, at least one of the Roman soldiers looked up and said, wow, this really is the Son of God. Jesus' act of sacrifice on the cross moved him to believe. So it could have a positive effect on the people that are trying to take advantage of us. But this is not a call to be weak, though. It's not a call to be a victim.
I was going to say,
because you're being intentional about this. You could punch back. You could fight back. Now, but we also do have to remember, though, that if you fought back against a Roman soldier, you were going to end up in
not
a
going to
really
work out for you.
bad way. So some of this was kind of practical, and we could say that Jesus clearly ran up against the system. If he didn't, he wouldn't have been crucified. So Jesus was confrontational in a lot of ways, but it was nonviolent. Jesus, he understood that violence begets violence, and we know that's the way it is. If you respond in violence, it just escalates, and there's never going to be true peace. And, we could talk about other practitioners of this. Gandhi, who was technically not a Christian, but he was very familiar with Jesus and the Gospels. Martin Luther King Jr., who was very confrontational, but very disruptive, but he pushed nonviolent civil disobedience. So it's not that Jesus is wanting people to be weak and to cower, but to be intentional in showing people something different, an alternative to the norm, which is just quick retaliation, escalating things, making them worse, and all the while God is treating us with a sense of grace. Christ is calling us to do the same.
I contend that it takes more strength to be patient and compassionate to those around us than it does to just fire off our mouths or throw fists in any kind of confrontation. Sometimes it's really difficult to pull ourselves back, but the only way to, in my opinion, to reach, and here we go again, what we talked about last week, resolution, is to take time to hear the other person, to work through things, and to understand that there's more to life than our things, or more to life than And I think one of the things that is in this that doesn't really get focused on is pride as well.
Right.
I think a lot of times our pride and ego keeps us from being the kind of compassionate ones that we probably should be. I think pride and ego fuel tempers a lot. And it goes back to the same talk I had the other day about being right. And, to me, this theme is emerging about how we treat people and community.
Yeah, and there's something to this in terms of it being about self-control. Like, there were actually others who said similar things. Some of the Stoics back in this day would say things like, a person only becomes your enemy if you make them your enemy. In other words, you don't have to retaliate in kind. You could do something to win somebody who's mistreating you as a friend.
Yeah.
It's like someone only becomes an enemy to you if you give them that power.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like we have more self-control over things than we think we do, and we have more alternatives and options. And if somebody's mistreating us, we don't have to just automatically. We could. What's more important, to have enemies or to try to win friends? And so some of that is, how much control do we give the people around us? Do we give them enough control where they have pushed us to make them our enemy? We have a choice in who our enemies are.
Yeah.
And if we don't want a person to be our enemy, that sounds weird, but it's true. I think it's very true. We have more power in situations than we really think we do.
And it's leading up to that next passage, which is about enemies, and that's what we'll talk a little bit about tomorrow.
Yep.
So we appreciate you taking your time and listening to us talk. Hopefully we've brought some insight.
Hope so.
Or maybe you just shook your head at us the whole time. I don't know. Let us know. Let us know if you have any points, any additional things you'd like to bring out of the text, or even if you think that maybe we're looking at something the wrong way. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you just want to say hi, say hi.
Hi, what's up?
We'd love to hear from you. We love to have interaction with you guys. We enjoy this, and we hope that you all enjoy it as well.
We do.
And we'll be back tomorrow with more from the Sermon on the Mount.
That's right.
We love you. We're praying for you, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Shalom.